Welcome back to the channel, where we dive into mysterious stories that the world still can't forget. Some cases may seem to have ended long ago. Yet they continue to raise endless questions and remain etched in people's memories. Today, we will revisit one of America's most haunting mysteries. Centered around a 6-year-old girl who shined like a little star but left the world in a heartbreaking and puzzling way. This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born in 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia, and later moved with her family to Boulder, Colorado. She was the daughter of JonBenét Ramsey, a successful businessman who held an important position at the technology company Access Graphics, and Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen who dedicated much of her life to caring for her children. The Ramsey family lived in a large, elegant home, a symbol of both comfort and success in their community. To outsiders, they looked like the picture of the perfect American family. From a very young age, JonBenét stood out thanks to her bright eyes, charming smile, and natural charisma. Guided by her mother, who had experience in pageants herself, JonBenét began to participate in children's beauty contests. By the age of 6, she had already captured attention, winning trophies and crowns, and becoming a familiar face in the world of child pageantry. To many, she was not just a little girl but also a symbol of youthful beauty and charm that drew fascination wherever she appeared. Life in the Ramsey household seemed almost ideal. John was seen as a hard-working and accomplished father, Patsy as a graceful mother who had once worn a crown. And their children were raised with love and provided every opportunity. The family represented wealth, stability, and success, the kind that many people admired. But as history has shown time and again, perfection on the surface often hides shadows behind closed doors. Some observers later remarked that JonBenét's fame at such a young age brought her both admiration and unwanted attention. The world of child pageants is filled with glitter, costumes, and spotlights, but it also comes with pressure and expectations. For JonBenét, her childhood was marked by both the joy of performing and the weight of living under constant public gaze. Then came a chilling winter morning, just after Christmas in 1996, when that image of a perfect family life was shattered forever. But before we step into that fateful day, it is important to pause and remember who JonBenét truly was, not merely a name in headlines, but a little girl full of life, loved by her family, and adored on stage. The tragic contrast between her shining presence and the sorrowful ending she met is what has turned this story into one of the most unforgettable mysteries in modern American history. As we continue JonBenét's story, it is impossible to overlook the central role that pageantry played in her short life. For many, beauty contests are simply light-hearted competitions where children dress up, sing, or perform. But for JonBenét, these events became a stage where her personality and charm captivated audiences. With her sparkling costumes, styled hair, and confident presence, she was often seen as more than just another contestant. She was the star of the show. Patsy Ramsey, her mother, was a key influence in this journey. Having once held the crown herself, Patsy understood the world of pageants and believed these events could give her daughter a chance to shine, to express herself, and to build confidence. Some saw this as a natural continuation of Patsy's own legacy. Others later questioned whether it placed too much attention on a child so young. But in the moment, JonBenét seemed to thrive under the spotlight. She enjoyed singing, smiling, and performing, bringing joy to those watching her. By the mid-1990s, JonBenét had already won several titles and trophies. Photos and videos of her performances circulated widely, and she quickly became recognized in the world of child beauty contests. Audiences remembered her not only for her polished appearance but also for her bright spirit. She had the kind of charisma that could light up a room, and people who met her often recalled her as a cheerful, loving child who adored life. For the Ramsey family, JonBenét's success was a source of pride. To them, she was a little girl following her passions, guided by a mother who wanted the best for her. Pageants also became family events, opportunities for them to celebrate JonBenét's achievements together. The trophies displayed in their home told the story of a child's accomplishments, but they also reflected the supportive environment her parents created. At the same time, however, not everyone viewed the pageant world in the same way. While many celebrated JonBenét's victories, others worried that competitions of this nature placed children under intense scrutiny. Television coverage and local newspapers sometimes showcased her photos, fueling debates about the role of childhood, innocence, and exposure. Whether intended or not, JonBenét had become a public figure. And with public attention often comes both admiration and criticism. Still, for JonBenet herself, those stages were places of happiness. The sound of applause, the lights shining down, the joy of winning a ribbon, all of it filled her young life with excitement. To watch her perform was to witness the enthusiasm of a child who genuinely loved being in the moment. And yet, this very visibility would later shape how the world remembered her. JonBenet was not just a child from Boulder, Colorado. She was a familiar face to many Americans, even before tragedy struck. This dual identity, as both a beloved daughter and a public figure, set the stage for the storm of attention that would follow her family in the days and years to come. December 25, 1996, was meant to be a night of joy for the Ramsey family. Like many households across America, they celebrated Christmas with warmth, traditions, and family gatherings. Friends and neighbors later recalled that the Ramseys appeared cheerful that evening, enjoying food, music, and the company of loved ones. Their elegant Boulder home, decorated with lights and holiday ornaments, reflected the spirit of the season. For JonBenet and her older brother Burke, Christmas was a magical time filled with presents, laughter, and the anticipation of the new year ahead. Patsy Ramsey, ever the proud mother, had hosted the family's holiday traditions with her characteristic energy. John, though often busy with work, was present and attentive, savoring the festive atmosphere. To anyone observing from the outside, the Ramseys' Christmas looked like a picture-perfect holiday, complete with a tree surrounded by gifts, children filled with excitement, and parents who seemed to have given their family everything they could ask for. JonBenet, in particular, seemed to embody the wonder of the season. Bright and full of energy, she had performed songs, opened her presents, and smiled her way through the night. Her charm was undeniable, and her presence made the evening memorable for everyone who saw her. To those who would later look back, it felt as though this Christmas was a final celebration of her light before darkness descended. When the evening drew to a close, the family returned to their routines. JonBenet was put to bed after the long day of excitement. The house fell quiet as the Ramseys prepared for the next morning, likely expecting nothing more than the continuation of holiday joy. Yet within hours, everything would change. In the early hours of December 26th, Patsy Ramsey awoke and began her morning. What should have been a calm, quiet start quickly turned into something unimaginable. As she descended the stairs, she noticed a piece of paper placed conspicuously on the staircase. It was a letter, long, unusual, and alarming. Addressed to the family, it claimed that JonBenet had been taken, and demanded a ransom of $118,000, an oddly specific figure. The tone of the letter was unsettling, filled with strange instructions and peculiar phrasing. Unlike typical ransom notes, this one spanned more than 2 pages, written in a style that puzzled investigators for years to come. Patsy, in shock and fear, immediately called the authorities, setting off a chain of events that would soon spiral into one of the most scrutinized investigations in American history. What began as a night of joy had, in the span of hours, turned into every parent's nightmare. The Ramseys' home, once a symbol of safety and family happiness, was suddenly at the center of chaos, confusion, and a mystery that has endured for decades. Morning light crept into Boulder on December 26, 1996, but inside the Ramsey home, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Patsy Ramsey, still shaken from finding the mysterious letter on the staircase, quickly realized that the situation was dire. The note was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was not a brief demand hastily written in panic, but rather a carefully composed letter, spanning more than 2 pages. Its length and detail immediately set it apart from most ransom notes investigators were familiar with. The note demanded $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return, an oddly specific number that raised questions from the very beginning. The figure was striking because it almost exactly matched John Ramsey's annual Christmas bonus from his company, Access Graphics. To some, this seemed like proof that whoever had written the note knew the family intimately. To others, it suggested a deliberate attempt to frame someone close to them. The tone of the letter was equally strange. It addressed the Ramseys in an almost theatrical manner, claiming that JonBenét had been taken by a foreign faction. It instructed John not to involve the police, not to contact friends, and not to share the contents of the letter with anyone. Yet Patsy immediately dialed 911, a reaction many saw as both natural for a terrified parent and contradictory to the instructions written in the note. When officers from the Boulder Police Department arrived at the scene, they were greeted with confusion and chaos. Friends and neighbors, who had been called by the Ramseys for support, were already moving in and out of the house. The crime scene quickly became crowded, making it difficult for investigators to secure potential evidence. This early lack of control over the environment would later be viewed as one of the most critical missteps in the entire case. As detectives examined the note, they were baffled by its unusual style. The handwriting appeared practiced, not rushed. The language seemed exaggerated, almost like a script. It spoke of threats, deadlines, and consequences, but to some experts, it felt less like the work of a hardened criminal and more like a staged attempt to mislead. Handwriting analysis would later become a point of contention, with some believing the note had been written by someone within the household, while others argued that it showed signs of an outsider's work. Meanwhile, the Ramseys were frantic. Patsy, deeply distressed, clung to the hope that complying with the letter's demands might save her daughter. John tried to remain composed, speaking with both police officers and friends, but the weight of fear hung heavy over him. Neighbors offered comfort, but beneath it all, there was an unshakable sense of dread. The ransom note, which was supposed to provide instructions for JonBenét's safe return, instead deepened the mystery. It left investigators questioning not only who could have written it but also why it contained so many peculiar details. Was it genuine, was it a diversion, and most importantly, where was JonBenét? The morning stretched on, and tension filled every corner of the Ramsey home. Police officers tried to make sense of the strange letter while family friends hovered close, offering comfort but also inadvertently disturbing what might have been crucial evidence. Hours passed, yet there was no phone call from the so-called kidnappers, no further instructions, nothing to confirm whether JonBenét was truly alive or where she might have been taken. The silence only deepened the sense of dread. Investigators initially operated under the assumption that JonBenét had been abducted and that the ransom demand would eventually be followed by some kind of contact. But as the morning turned into afternoon, The lack of communication grew more suspicious. The note had spoken with urgency, demanding money and threatening consequences if the family acted out of line. Yet no further word came. It was as though the letter existed in isolation, raising more questions than answers. In the midst of this uncertainty, law enforcement instructed John Ramsey and a family friend to search the house once more, this time more carefully, in case there was a clue that had been overlooked. What happened next would change everything. John descended into the basement, a part of the home not often visited, and made his way into a small, dimly lit storage room often referred to as the wine cellar. There, to his horror, he discovered the lifeless body of his daughter, JonBenét. The discovery sent shockwaves through the house. John carried his daughter upstairs, a reaction born out of desperation and anguish, but in doing so he unknowingly disrupted the crime scene. Officers and paramedics rushed to assess the situation. But it was already too late. JonBenét had suffered injuries that immediately suggested foul play, including signs of trauma that made it clear this was not an accident. What had begun as a suspected kidnapping had now transformed into a homicide investigation. The mood inside the Ramsey home shifted dramatically. Friends and neighbors who had gathered to provide comfort were now confronted with the devastating truth. Police officers, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, scrambled to secure what was left of the scene. Yet the early hours of confusion, the crowded house, and the movement of people had already compromised much of the evidence. In the years to come, critics would argue that this single day, December 26, 1996, set the case on a course from which it could never fully recover. The shock of JonBenét's death rippled far beyond the walls of her home. News of the tragedy spread quickly, first through the Boulder community and then across the nation. A 6-year-old girl, known for her smile, her pageant crowns, and her promising future, was gone. But the most haunting aspect was that the crime had unfolded not in some distant or dangerous place, but within the supposed safety of her own home. In the hours after JonBenét was found, the Ramsey home no longer felt like a place of warmth or safety. It became the center of a crime scene, though one already compromised by too many footsteps and too much commotion. The Boulder police, stunned by the discovery, struggled to gain control. And almost immediately, their focus shifted inward toward the very people who had lived under that roof. From the beginning, investigators faced contradictions. The ransom note spoke of an abduction, yet JonBenét's body was found in the basement of her own home. The supposed kidnappers had demanded a ransom, but no one had called, no one had tried to collect, and there was no sign of forced entry. To detectives, the simplest explanation seemed to be that the answer lay within the house itself. The family, once viewed as victims, suddenly became subjects of suspicion. John and Patsy Ramsey, along with their son Burke, found themselves under an invisible spotlight. Some officers questioned why John had carried his daughter's body upstairs, disturbing the scene. Others wondered about Patsy's 911 call, her tone of voice, and her decision to contact friends despite the note's instructions. Even Burke, only 9 years old at the time, was not immune from speculation. Though police had no clear evidence against him, theories would swirl for years about whether a sibling conflict had somehow escalated in ways too terrible to imagine. The media soon descended on Boulder, and with it came a frenzy of speculation. Television anchors, newspapers, and talk shows dissected every detail of the case, often pointing fingers before facts were clear. To the public, the story had every ingredient of a tragic mystery: a wealthy family, a child beauty queen, a shocking death, and unanswered questions. The pressure mounted not just on investigators but also on the Ramseys, who now had to grieve while defending themselves against rumors. Critics of the police argued that the investigation was mishandled from the start. The failure to secure the home, the decision to allow family and friends to roam freely, and the contamination of evidence created gaps that could never be closed. Others believed the case was handled too softly because of the family's social standing, suggesting that ordinary suspects might have been questioned more aggressively. For the Ramseys, the scrutiny was unbearable. They maintained their innocence and insisted that an intruder must have entered the home and committed the crime. Yet as the weeks turned into months, the lack of arrests and the cloud of suspicion only grew. Instead of sympathy, the family found themselves the subject of late-night jokes, tabloid headlines, and endless theories. By the end of that winter, the story of JonBenét Ramsey was no longer just about the loss of a little girl. It had become a national obsession. And with every passing day, the line between investigation and public spectacle blurred, leaving the truth buried beneath layers of speculation, distrust, and unanswered questions. As investigators tried to untangle the threads of the case, one piece of evidence kept pulling them back to the same unsettling questions. The ransom note. Unlike the hurried, short demands typically seen in abduction cases, this letter stretched across more than 2 pages. Its length, tone, and oddly specific demand of $118,000 baffled experts. It did not read like the words of a professional criminal. It read like something else entirely. Handwriting specialists pored over the note, comparing it to samples taken from Patsy Ramsey. Some analysts claimed there were similarities, though never enough to definitively prove she wrote it. Others argued the style looked deliberate, as though the writer had tried to disguise their hand. The phrasing itself seemed theatrical, at times even dramatic, with references to a foreign faction that no one could identify. To skeptics, it looked less like a genuine threat and more like a carefully staged piece of writing, designed to mislead. Beyond the note, the physical evidence only deepened the confusion. DNA samples collected from JonBenét's clothing pointed to an unknown male. Yet the profile did not match anyone in the Ramsey family or their acquaintances. On the surface, this supported the intruder theory. But critics cautioned that the DNA evidence might have been the result of contamination, either from manufacturing or from the chaotic handling of the crime scene. What was supposed to be a clear scientific answer instead became another piece of the puzzle that did not quite fit. The condition of the house also raised questions. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, yet a basement window was found slightly open, suggesting a possible point of access. Some believed an intruder had slipped inside through that window, committed the crime, and vanished without leaving further trace. Others countered that the window had been open for months and showed no signs of fresh disturbance, weakening the idea of an outside assailant. For law enforcement and the public alike, the evidence split the case into 2 dominant theories. The first was the family theory, which argued that one of the Ramseys, intentionally or accidentally, caused JonBenét's death and staged the scene to deflect suspicion. Supporters of this theory pointed to the note, the lack of forced entry, and the unusual behavior of the family in the aftermath. The second was the intruder theory, which maintained that someone outside the household had entered the home that night, carrying out a crime of opportunity or obsession. This camp leaned heavily on the unidentified DNA evidence and the possibility of entry through the basement. As time went on, both theories gained passionate defenders. Television programs, books, and later documentaries presented the case through different lenses, each offering its own conclusions. But with each argument came new contradictions, new reasons to doubt, and new ways the truth seemed to slip further away. The more the evidence was scrutinized, the more it resembled a hall of mirrors, every detail reflecting in 2 directions at once, leaving no single path toward certainty. And for investigators, the frustrating reality became clear: without a breakthrough, the question of who killed JonBenét Ramsey would remain unanswered. As weeks turned into months, the case of JonBenét Ramsey was no longer just a local investigation, it had become a national spectacle. Television networks devoted entire segments to the mystery. Newspapers ran daily headlines, and talk shows dissected every development with relentless curiosity. For many Americans, JonBenét's image, her pageant photos with crowns and ribbons, became a haunting symbol of innocence lost. The press coverage was unlike anything seen before for a crime involving a child. Photographs of JonBenét, dressed in glittering costumes, were splashed across front pages, while newscasters replayed footage of her performances again and again. Some argued that these images contributed to the sensationalism, turning the tragedy into a media phenomenon rather than a solemn pursuit of justice. For the Ramsey family, grief became public property. Every expression, every interview, every word they spoke was analyzed, debated, and judged. Public opinion quickly split into camps. Some believed wholeheartedly that the Ramseys were responsible, pointing to inconsistencies in their statements and the strangeness of the ransom note. Others insisted that the family was being unfairly vilified, victims of both the crime itself and a police force under pressure to find quick answers. This division was not just confined to living rooms and coffee shops, it played out across national television, with experts, commentators, and even armchair detectives offering their own theories. The sheer intensity of coverage transformed the Ramsey case into one of the first modern media-driven mysteries. At a time when cable news was expanding and tabloid culture was thriving, JonBenét's story became a template for how true crime would be consumed in the decades to come. Documentaries, books, and later internet forums dissected every shred of evidence, with strangers debating passionately about who was guilty and who was innocent. For investigators, this overwhelming media attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it kept the case alive in the public consciousness, ensuring that it would never be forgotten. On the other, it fueled speculation that often outpaced the facts, creating a haze of rumors and misinformation. False leads were reported as breakthroughs, and theories that should have remained private spread like wildfire, muddying the waters even further. The Ramseys, meanwhile, found themselves trapped in a paradox. They wanted justice for their daughter, yet the more they appeared in public to defend themselves, the more critics accused them of being insincere. Interviews they gave on television were picked apart endlessly, with viewers scrutinizing their tone, body language, and choice of words. What might have been simple human reactions to grief were instead framed as clues in a trial by media. By the late 1990s, the name JonBenét Ramsey had become synonymous with mystery. Her story had outgrown the original tragedy and turned into a cultural reference point, a symbol of unsolved crime in America. And with each passing year without resolution, the sense of obsession only grew. The case had become more than just a search for answers, it was a mirror reflecting the way society consumes tragedy, blending empathy with curiosity, justice with spectacle. And at the center of it all was the haunting image of a 6-year-old girl whose story the world could not let go. As the new millennium began, the case of JonBenét Ramsey remained frozen in uncertainty. Despite years of investigation, no one had been charged, and the mystery seemed destined to remain unsolved. Yet advances in forensic science, particularly DNA testing, offered new hope. Technology that had not been available in 1996 was now capable of extracting and analyzing genetic material from even the smallest traces of evidence. In the early 2000s, investigators revisited key pieces of evidence, most notably the clothing JonBenét had worn. A DNA profile was developed from samples found on her, and it pointed to an unidentified male. This discovery gave weight to the intruder theory, suggesting that someone outside the family had been present in the house that night. But the DNA alone could not provide a name, and the mystery figure remained faceless. To some, the evidence was a breakthrough. To others, it was inconclusive, possibly the result of contamination. The Boulder District Attorney's Office, facing pressure from both the public and media, made several attempts to reinvigorate the case. Special investigators were brought in, task forces were created, and tips from around the country were chased down. But each lead seemed to end in disappointment. False confessions occasionally surfaced, including one highly publicized claim by a man in 2006 who said he had been involved. Yet his story fell apart under scrutiny, and the DNA evidence ruled him out, adding another frustrating twist to an already tangled case. Meanwhile, the story of JonBenét continued to live on in the public imagination. Television networks produced documentaries, news specials, and dramatizations. Each program revisited the evidence, re-interviewed witnesses, and reignited debates. Books written by investigators, journalists, and even the Ramsey family themselves added new layers of perspective. But with every new theory came more division. Some argued the evidence against the family was overwhelming. Others believed the DNA pointed firmly to an intruder. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney formally cleared John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey of involvement, citing the DNA evidence as proof that the killer was someone outside the household. But by then, public opinion was so deeply divided that many refused to accept the conclusion. For some, the clearance was long overdue. For others, it was seen as an attempt to close a chapter that still had too many unanswered questions. The years passed, but the fascination never faded. Online communities dissected every detail, creating timelines, analyzing the ransom note, and debating the credibility of suspects. True crime podcasts and YouTube channels kept the discussion alive for new generations. The case had evolved beyond an unsolved murder. It had become a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of both the promise and the limitations of modern criminal investigation. Even today, nearly 3 decades later, JonBenét Ramsey's name continues to echo through true crime culture. Her story is revisited not only because of its haunting details but also because it represents a question that has never been answered. How could such a crime take place inside a family home, leave behind so many conflicting clues, and still remain unsolved? For many, the legacy of the case is not just about tragedy, but also about the pursuit of truth. The hope remains that one day, science, persistence, or even a confession might finally unlock the mystery and bring justice to a little girl whose story the world has never forgotten. Nearly 3 decades have passed since the morning JonBenét Ramsey was discovered in her family's basement, yet the world remains without answers. For many, the case is not just about a crime but about the profound human questions it raises. How innocence can be shattered in an instant, how justice can remain elusive, and how society itself consumes and retells tragedy. JonBenét's story is still revisited time and again, not only by investigators but also by the public. Her face, frozen in photographs of pageant crowns and bright smiles, has become one of the most enduring symbols in the history of true crime. The tragedy resonates so deeply because it touches on universal fears, the idea that danger can strike in the very place we feel safest, and that even with the best resources, answers are not always within reach. For the Ramsey family, the years after 1996 were marked by both grief and relentless scrutiny. John Ramsey tried to rebuild a life, though he would forever be known as the father at the center of the case. Patsy Ramsey, who endured years of suspicion and media attacks, passed away in 2006 without ever seeing her family's name cleared in the eyes of the public. Burke, the older brother, has spoken only sparingly, living under the shadow of whispers that followed him since childhood. The tragedy did not just take JonBenét's life, it permanently altered the lives of those who loved her most. The case also left a lasting imprint on law enforcement. It highlighted how crucial the earliest hours of an investigation are and how easily evidence can be lost when procedures are not followed. Boulder police were criticized for failing to secure the scene, for focusing too quickly on the family, and for allowing public pressure to shape their decisions. Future cases would be studied with these mistakes in mind, as investigators sought to avoid another collapse of trust between authorities and the public. In the broader culture, JonBenét's case helped shape the modern landscape of true crime storytelling. Long before podcasts and streaming documentaries dominated the genre, her story revealed how deeply audiences could become invested in unsolved mysteries. Today, true crime is one of the most popular forms of media, and many trace its rise back to the late 1990s, when nightly news shows turned JonBenét into a household name. The case blurred the lines between journalism, entertainment, and investigation, raising questions about how stories of tragedy should be told and who has the right to tell them. And yet, for all the theories, for all the documentaries, for all the debates that continue in living rooms and online forums, the core truth remains unchanged. A 6-year-old girl was taken far too soon, and no one has been held accountable. Every time the case resurfaces, people hope for resolution. They look to advances in DNA technology, to new confessions, or to forgotten witnesses who might finally step forward. That hope persists because the story of JonBenét Ramsey is not just about death, it is about the search for justice that feels incomplete. Perhaps the greatest legacy of JonBenét's story is its reminder of fragility. Childhood, family, safety, things we often take for granted can be upended in ways that defy comprehension. Her life, though short, left an imprint that continues to spark conversations about truth, justice, and the power of memory. As we close this chapter, we are left not with answers but with reflection. JonBenét's story is a mirror, forcing us to confront how society responds to tragedy, how justice systems struggle with complexity, and how the media shapes the narratives we inherit. Above all, it is a story about a little girl who should have had the chance to grow up, whose laughter should have filled her home for many years to come. And so, even after all this time, we say her name, we remember her story, and we keep alive the hope that someday, the final piece of truth will come to light. Until then, JonBenét Ramsey remains more than a mystery, she remains a symbol of innocence, a reminder of questions left unanswered, and a call for justice that has yet to be fulfilled. As we come to the end of this journey through the story of JonBenét Ramsey, one truth remains above all others: her life, though short, touched millions of people and continues to remind us of how precious and fragile childhood truly is. Her case is more than a mystery locked in time, it is a reflection of the questions we still ask about justice, truth, and the ways we, as a society, respond to tragedy. While the answers may remain hidden, the memory of JonBenét endures. Each retelling of her story is not only about the crime itself but also about the hope that one day justice will prevail. It is a story that belongs not just to history, but to the ongoing conversation about compassion, resilience, and the search for truth. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of today's video. If you found this story meaningful, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue exploring the world's greatest mysteries together. Your support helps keep these stories alive and ensures that voices like JonBenét's are never forgotten. Until next time, take care of yourselves, cherish the moments with your loved ones, and remember, behind every mystery is a story worth telling. See you again soon.